Hey, so in today's video, what we are going to be talking to you about is what is a dividend, how does a company pay a dividend, but also why you really want to look for dividend paying stocks. Okay, so what is a dividend? A dividend is basically money that a company, let's say for example TD Bank, because that's one I have a lot of money invested into. That's the money that, let's say, TD Bank creates from their clients, from their customers. And from there, let's say, for example, this is just a hypothetical, just hypothetical, let's say they make $60 billion, which is a lot of money. Out of that $60 billion, that is how they are going to be paying their dividend. And what is a dividend? That is money that their investors make from their earnings. So let's say, for example, they have 3 investors. Obviously, they have more. They are a massive company. Let's say they want to pay their investors, which is something that TD Bank actually does. Well, they're not going to be paying out 100% of their dividend. Of course, every company is different, but let's just say, to make math easy, they want to pay out 50% of their earnings as a dividend. That would make it a $30 billion dividend. Of course, every company is different when it comes to earnings and when it comes to how much they want to pay out of their earnings and things like that. But let's say they want to pay out 50%, which makes it $30 billion. Well, that would mean that each one of those 3 investors would get $10 billion each. However, of course, there's millions of investors in TD Bank, but this is just an example to make math easy. And of course, those investors are very happy right now. Some companies will only pay a dividend once a year. Some companies will pay it every quarter, and then other companies will pay it every single month. And it really comes down to what that business really does and how they just generally like to pay a dividend. There's also sometimes that companies will make more money than they are expecting. For example, when Donald Trump got elected last time, back in 2016, as president, he made a massive a deduction for all businesses, and then those businesses, a lot of them, paid a special dividend to their investors because they saved a lot of money on tax. And then a company that I used to work for, even though I'm Canadian, they still did that special bonus for their employees. And it was Best Buy was the company, and all their employees got, depending on how much they worked that year, between $500 and $2,000 as a bonus. I got $2,000, so thank you, Trump. But this is one of the ways that companies will pay a dividend, but this is not every single company. Here is another example on how a company could pay a dividend. So now we have company number 2. Company number 2, let's say, is Apple. Their ticker is AAPL. And let's say Apple makes an astonishing $1 trillion of earnings in a single quarter, which they probably will in a couple of years. But let's say they make $1 trillion in a quarter. That is a lot of money. Now, let's say we are now splitting it into those 3 investors, just to make math easy once again. And now they want to split that $1 trillion, but let's say, for example, they don't necessarily want to pay out that $1 trillion. What they want to do is take let's say they want to pay out 50% again, that's just to make math easy, which then makes it $500 billion. Well, let's say they don't want to pay out $500 billion to their investors, and some companies will do this for a couple of different reasons. They may not want to pay their investors because it's too expensive. They've made that money already, but they don't want to pay it out. They want to keep it in the bank. So what they could do is to get from a bank a $500 billion loan. We'll call that loan. And then, because maybe the interest rate on that loan is super low, and maybe they think that they could get a better return on investment of that $500 billion that they just got as cash to be now spent on something bigger, maybe an investment possibly into another company. Maybe they want to just loan it out themselves at a higher percentage rate. Who knows? They could be doing anything with that money. It may be able to make them more money as just investing in other companies and making a dividend themselves from it than what the loan could be. Let's say the loan is 2.5%. And then they can pay it off over that time with that same investment or that same cash that they already have that's invested in other things or doing other things. And then they can pay off that loan over time. Meanwhile, they're still paying a dividend to their their investors. And at this point, the investors are once again happy, but this is a more not so sustainable dividend, in my opinion, because anything could happen with that $500 billion, whereas paying it off to the investors, at least the investors get it, and that company doesn't have to go into debt to then pay a dividend. Many companies do it this way, and I personally don't think it's the best way, but a lot of companies do business like this. So ultimately, why do companies pay a dividend? It's really to make the investor happy. That is number one. Warren Buffett was really on Apple to get basically share buybacks, which is essentially a dividend in a way, but also there was a lot of different investors into Apple themselves who wanted them to pay a dividend, and that's why they paid a dividend. They make a lot of money, so they should be able to pay it out. But they did take that route of taking a loan to pay the dividend, mainly because they didn't want to pay the tax on getting the overseas money back to the United States, and then pay, of course, not just the tax, but also now the fact that an interest on a loan is so much lower than a 40 or even 50 or even higher percent tax on that money, that it was better off spent in other places. So of course, in cases like Apple, it makes more sense than it did to pay off a dividend, and they still pay a pretty good dividend considering that it's an American company. American companies are not really known for paying extravagantly high dividends like Canadian banks and other Canadian assets, but just keep that in mind on how different companies will pay their dividend. Are they paying a dividend higher than what they're making, which makes it really unsustainable? And then also, when it comes down to why a company would pay a dividend, it all comes down to investor relations, but also shows that they are making money. And there's a lot of people like myself who enjoy getting a dividend because then it can pay for things like life. And especially when you get older and you want to retire, which I'm not retiring anytime soon, I could classify myself as retired because I make money off of the stock market as well as my own business. I don't work an hourly job, but people like my father who are just retiring now, they're looking to get dividends so that they can basically live. Now, I hope that this video has helped you understand really what a dividend is. It's more on the basic knowledge. I'm not getting way too advanced. Anyways, if you have enjoyed today's video, hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you guys again next time.